I'm no stranger to the scent of industrial cleaners or the sounds of monitors beeping in the distance. Hospitals had started to feel like a second home to me. I've been coming here regularly throughout my adult life. However, recently it seems like it's every single day. My wife, Hannah, has been in and out of the hospital nearly her entire life. She was born with a weak constitution and has always been prone to illnesses. However, just by looking at her, you wouldn't think her weak at all. She's one of those people who have larger-than-life personalities, always full of laughter and compassion whenever in the presence of others. However, the same can't be said from behind closed doors. When it was just me and her, she'd be so drained of energy it would leave her bedridden for days at a time. This often led to her catching some type of virus or infection that would send her right back to the hospital. As much as I hate to admit it, this has become the norm for us. When we first started dating, it only happened every so often, but as the years passed by, the illnesses seemed to pile on. Some people might think a relationship such as this one would be a burden, and while I do admit things have been challenging at times, I would never trade her for anything. I actually owe my life to Hannah. She saved me when I was at my lowest, and I have been grateful to her ever since. We started dating shortly after that, and we never looked back. During the winter, Hannah had gotten a bad case of pneumonia, and it hit her hard. That set off a series of illnesses that compiled until she was forced to remain in the hospital indefinitely. I hated seeing her like this. I felt so powerless to do anything to help her recover. Nearly halfway through the third month, the doctor approached me and informed me that her condition was rapidly deteriorating. They said that she wasn't responding well to any of the treatments and they were running out of options. I was furious when I heard this. I found myself shouting at the doctor, asking him what the hell I was even paying him for. He just lowered his head curtly, before emotionlessly apologizing, something doctors seem to be exceptionally good at. I could feel my anger and frustration rising within me. I was about to give the doctor a bit more than just a piece of my mind, when I felt something grab my arm. I looked down and saw Hannah smiling at me from her bed. Instantly, the anger, hatred, and frustration all vanished. I felt the weight of the entire world fall off of me. The doctor took his leave, and we just sat together for hours. Hannah assured me that none of this in any way was my fault, and that regardless of what happens, that she would always be with me. I hated hearing her say that. Talking like she was ready to give up, and throwing everything to the wind. I told her that I needed her to focus on recovering, so we could continue being happy together. She just returned a faint smile, brushed the side of my face, and said okay. I knew she was just telling me what I wanted to hear, but it didn't matter. I still enjoyed hearing it. I told her I was going to step outside and grab something to drink from the vending machine. I asked if she wanted anything, and she just brushed a hand. As soon as her hospital room door shut behind me, I felt like something was off. The hallway was somewhat darkened, and I could no longer hear the shuffling footsteps or the rhythmic beeps of monitors in the distance. I couldn't even see any doctors, nurses, or patients walking around. I thought it was odd, but it was growing late into the evening. I had been staying here later and later, trying to spend as much time with Hannah as possible. I just thought that maybe it was a slow night for the hospital. Then I pondered if hospitals even have slow nights. I marched up to the vending machine and retrieved my wallet. I stood there carefully examining all my options, when suddenly I heard a voice from behind me say, "What'll it be?" I nearly jumped out of my skin and spun around. Standing behind me was an older-looking man. He was sporting a decent-looking suit and a hat, and brandishing a cane, though it didn't seem like he needed one. He greeted me with a large, toothy smile, and I just nervously nodded back to him. I turned back around, trying to steady my rapidly thudding heart. I quickly decided on an item and stepped aside for the old man to use the machine. He just stood there, smiling at me. I asked him if he was going to use it, but his gaze never drifted off of me. A moment later, he began to speak. "You're here for your wife, aren't you?" I was stunned when I heard this. "Yeah. How did you?" The man raised a hand to me. "It's written all over your face. It was either your partner or child, and I just guessed." I chuckled quietly to myself and nodded. He then said something cryptic to me, something which at the time I thought little of. "What would you give to fix her condition?" "Anything," I responded. I didn't even hesitate. "Anything? Really? I might be able to provide some assistance then. I know some, powerful people who might be able to do something about your wife's situation." At the time, I thought he was referring to like the chief of medicine or something like that. I quickly asked him if he could help. He nodded before continuing. "Things like this usually have a price." "Name it," I replied without missing a beat. The old man thought for a few minutes, then a few minutes more. He turned to me and told me to think of a number between 1 and 10. Strange question, but I just glanced around for a moment before deciding upon a number. He then held out a hand to me and asked me very directly, "Would you like me to save your wife?" "Yes," I said, gripping his hand tightly and shaking it. "Very well," he answered. He retrieved his hand from my grip, slightly bowed towards me, and walked off down the hallway. The entire interaction was an odd one, but as soon as I entered the hospital room, all of my thoughts vanished when I saw Hannah sleeping there. I brushed the hair from her face and hoped she would be all right. During the 4th month, Hannah's condition began to change. Her vitals and demeanor were improving dramatically. The doctors couldn't explain it, and neither could Hannah. She just continually expressed how she never felt this good before. We went home about halfway through the 4th month in the hospital. Since then, the years began to fly by, and it was like Hannah had become a completely new person. She was still herself, of course, but so much brighter. We traveled the world together, doing all the things we never could before. She still couldn't explain how this happened, and whenever she questioned it, I'd just shrug. However, I'd think about that old man I spoke to in the hallway, and how he must have spoken to the head doctor and got her on some new medication. Things in our life had never been better, until 6 years since that hospital night passed. I suddenly started to have terrible nightmares. At first, I wasn't sure what was happening. Hannah would wake me up in the middle of the night to tell me I was shouting and struggling in my sleep. Oddly, though, I had no memory of such a nightmare. As the weeks passed, I began waking myself up in a cold sweat, but still having no memory of what caused it. This continued for weeks, and while Hannah was growing worried for me, I just chalked it up to work-related stress. Then, after around 6 months, I began to notice something strange. Whenever I would drive home from work at night, I thought I could see people standing outside in the dark. At first, I thought it was my eyes just playing tricks on me, but the more it started to happen, the more I realized that wasn't the case. I decided not to tell Hannah about this, as I didn't want her to worry. I honestly thought that I had become so overworked that I was starting to hallucinate. I tried to ignore it, and hoped that it would just go away. During that time, Hannah could tell something was wrong. She was always asking me if I was okay, to which I'd smile and tell her I was fine. About a week ago, I was startled awake once again by some unknown nightmare. I sat up in my bed and looked to Hannah, who was still asleep next to me. I smiled at her, got up and grabbed a glass of water. As I sipped from the glass, I walked over to our living room window and glanced outside of it. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor. There were hundreds of silhouettes, all standing outside of our house, and more were appearing by the minute. Hannah came rushing out asking if I was all right. I snapped from the window and looked down. I apologized to her and told her that my hand must have slipped. She grabbed some paper towels and walked over to me. She looked out of the window and asked what I was staring at. I told her nothing. But that was a lie. Those faceless people were all standing there, outside of our house. Last night, as I was taking some much-needed time off from work, Hannah was cleaning up the house. I sat there on the couch in a daze when I heard Hannah say something from the kitchen. She said, "Wow, 7 years already." I glanced over and asked her what she was talking about. She said that it's almost been 7 years since that night in the hospital. When I heard this, my body tensed up. She noticed my uncomfortable expression and asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and told her it was nothing. That night, as Hannah drifted off to sleep, I sat down at my desk and began to write this out. The reason that I wanted to get this all down was because of what Hannah had said earlier. She said it had been 7 years since that night. Despite all the time that has passed since then, I still remember that night very clearly. I remember the old man and the conversation we had together. I even remember the number that the man asked me to choose. The number between 1 and 10. It was 7. 7 years. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. All of these troubling experiences I've been having lately all seem to be culminating into one point. I just wanted to say that I do not regret whatever happens. I'm glad for the time I got to spend with my wife, and I'm glad that she's still here with me. I just wish I would have chosen the number 10 instead of 7. Hannah, if you wake up and I'm not here, just know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not telling you, and I love you very much. I'm not sure, but I think I just heard a faint knock behind me, coming from the door. The bedroom door.